Some of the most uncomfortable conversations are when a coworker says, you know what? I don't think that the person that I'm next to has very good hygiene and they stink. I mean, talk about an uncomfortable, conversation.
Hello and welcome to Center for Victory's podcast of Your Best Day Yet. At Center for Victory, we're here to help unlock, reinforce, and enrich relationships through personal and professional development. I'm Eric Guy, Chief Victory Officer at the Center for Victory. With us today, another special guest, Ms. Carol Bowser. Just going to tell you a little bit about her, and then I'm going to have her tell her story because she has a very interesting topic that we're going to be talking about, probably something near and dear that everybody can learn something from today. But she is a workplace conflict expert. After practicing employment law for several years, Carol founded Conflict Management Strategies when she realized a lawsuit can't deliver the level of resolution and satisfaction that is gained when people are actively involved in creating solutions to their workplace conflict. That's very interesting. Can't wait to talk about that. Carol's clients come with a wide range of employers because conflict is universal across all industries and types of organizations. Where there are people, of course, there is conflict for sure. Key is to help people recognize and address conflict before it damages workplace relationships and creates organizational drag. 20 years of experience, has discovered some universal themes about workplace conflict, and she's going to be sharing those today. So welcome, Carol. Glad to have you as a guest.
So happy to be here to share the gospel of managing conflict and empowering people.
Has it gotten worse?
I'm going to give you the fantastic lawyer, mediator, consultant answer of it depends. I think it's a little bit with, the rise of social media and there are a lot of voices out there. And sometimes the really angry voices or the really loud voices can grab our attention. However, if we're talking about how people feel about what people's assumptions are about what a good coworker is, what a good company is, what a good employee is, I think there are some universal themes that go from generation to generation to generation. And I think every generation in part may redefine what good is, what the expectations are. And I think whether you call that evolutionary or revolutionary, that it has kind of always been there. And if we are able to ask the questions about what do I want work to be, how does that resonate with me? And I think several generations ago, it was just we get a job, that's the job we have. And now we are expecting a lot more of ourselves and of the workplace. It's like we want to be able to have a higher calling, a higher purpose for the job, and therefore the working relationships, and therefore the expectations of leaders, and therefore the expectations of the work group in its entirety.
Mm-hmm. So if we could jump back and tell your story about how you got into all this and what drives you, your why behind this, because I think it's really important to understand, like for all of our listeners, young, old, whatever, is like there was something there that sparked some interest, that sparked some purpose. And I don't think you necessarily set out to do this, but you saw a need. Is that right? Or
Yeah, I think it was more of a personal need.
Mhm.
And I know very, very few people who say that when I was a young child or when I was in junior high school or high school, that this is exactly what I wanted to do. And as a side note, I mean, you look at how much the workplace and how economies have changed over time that, I don't know that if I had said, I want to be a mediator, that people would have even known what that was. I certainly didn't know what that was, or an expert in workplace conflict resolution. So, kind of looking back, it was a circuitous route. There were detours. There were, like, I think, bridges that were out in certain ways. Uh, And I have become an entrepreneur over the last 20 years, and I never expected that. I was more expecting to be able to get, go to school, go to college, get a, get a job. And then I came from, part of my family, they were long-term employees, to the point where they were there for decades. And back when they had pensions, you get a good job, you get a pension, and the workplace has changed. So after getting my 4-year degree at the University of Denver, go Pioneers, that I went into the workforce. And I think I was a fairly naive employee, if that's a good way to say it. Like, I didn't really understand the rights and responsibilities, the mutual rights and mutual responsibilities in the employment relationship. I mean, it's a relationship governed by laws and regulations. This was way before we started talking about, company culture. And I just had a series of employment things where I'm like, had I known what my rights and responsibilities were as an employee, and the laws that govern them, what the appropriate expectations would have been, would I have made the same decisions? And I thought, well, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe there are some things I would have said. Maybe there is something, maybe there are different questions I would have asked. Maybe I would have been a little bit more discerning about it. But I'm a big believer in looking at the flip side. Had I known what the employer's legal responsibilities were and what their obligations were to the employee, would I have done the same course of action? And the thing is, absolutely not. So I started thinking out, well, where do you learn about rights and responsibilities? Oh, I learned about that at law school. And my father is an attorney. And I find that I would never have called it the family business. However, I think a lot of people might be drawn to things that look familiar.
Mhm.
So, I think folks who are in the trades, they see very, very familiarity of what that work looks like. People who are in the medical profession, who are parents, they're very familiar with that. Lawyers are familiar with lawyers. So, I mean, here's a little bit of, I don't know if it's inspirational or terrifying. Lawyers tend to breed other lawyers. So it's just, because that's who that's who, who you're familiar with. And so I went to law school thinking I would maybe be a judge. I thought that was a good way of, like, resolving disputes. Then I found out what judges really spend most of their time doing. I'm like, it's no interest in that whatsoever. But then I was just really, went back to, why was I here in the first place? What was the catalyst for doing it? And it was the rights and responsibilities in the employment relationship. So circuitously, I did that. But before I went to law school, I was interested in this thing called mediation, which had the individual people involved in brainstorming, collaborating, discussing, and coming up with mutual solutions to resolve areas of concern. I'm like, that just totally sounds like my jam. And I ended up taking mediation training before I went to law school. And that really shifted the lens in which I looked at disputes and relationships, and how people get into disputes, how they escalate disputes, how they get mired in disputes, and maybe how they, craft their way out of dispute. And sometimes when they just decide to leave it on the roadside. So then I practiced law for a few years, and looking back, it was not a good alignment of knowledge, skills, talent, or interest. There is something about the legal profession that at the time when I went to law school, and here's a disclaimer, that they had a counselor come into the law school class and said something like 25% of law students suffer from clinical depression.
Wow.
And then as a profession, this is an old statistic, but about 20% of the people in the legal profession leave the profession. And having taken out student loans and having to repay student loans, and like, how are we going to repay these student loans? Because um, it's difficult. Law schools tend to be very, very expensive. However, I remember one professor just said, basically, if you have trouble repaying your loans, what are they going to do? Repossess your brain? Because all law school does is train people to think like lawyers and work within a dispute resolution system. And so it's like, oh, no, they can't repossess the brain. But, where is it that I find that my brain kind of thrives, what I find value in, what I get inspired by, people who I'm inspired by? It was in the conflict resolution space. And so I eventually ended up starting what has become conflict management strategies. But I've been around for a little while, seen a couple of recessions, and it's an entrepreneurial game. So you have to be able to increase your skills, increase your awareness, and adapt. And it's been a good ride, but it has not been a direct route.
So I'm gonna maybe jump the gun here a little bit, so I apologize. But I think most people want to know, like, does it work?
Does the dispute resolution stuff work?
Yeah.
I'm going to give you an answer again. It depends. I think so. Yes, I do a variety of different things. I do coaching. Sometimes it's professional development because people just want to up their game. Sometimes it's like, hey, we got an issue. Sometimes it's group work when there's an issue within the group. Sometimes it's mediation where there might be one particular relationship. And sometimes it's speaking and training just to be able to help people increase their conflict resolution muscles, providing tools, framework, and very importantly, language to be able to use. And so part of it is I'm an outsider
Mhm.
and I can provide tools and talk and do some reality testing and, help people come up with options. But ultimately, it's their choice, which I think is lovely. It's the employee's choice of, what or if they want to be able to do things differently. It's the employer's choice if they want to keep the employee there and how they want to be able to, address issues and do they want to address issues. And sometimes I am just there to be able to kind of help facilitate a mutual breakup. But sometimes during my process, people look at each other and say, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't think this is valuable for me. Or even with managers and supervisors with an employee, they're like, you know what? I don't think this is going to be a good fit anymore. So it all kind of depends, but hopefully if I'm doing my job, people feel more involved in the process, can articulate their wants and needs, and be able to look at each other and say, you know, can at some way, shape, or form our needs or our desires get met such that the working environment and the working relationship improves.
Yeah, I think it's well, I just from my experience being working with companies, I think it's well needed. But I also think having someone like yourself, professional like yourself, to kind of wade through some of those things because I'm sure things probably get blown out of proportion sometimes, and there are some issues that are just more sensitive to other people and things like that. Would I be correct or?
You would be correct. And since we've, got leaders here, one of the things I think that consultants can provide a, a resource for, a very powerful resource, is that um, I make it a point of not getting, and what I call it, getting caught up in the gears of the organization, because there are always power dynamics within organizations. And as a leader, you are always looking at it from your leader lens, which may be very, very different and several, if not multiple steps removed of the people who are having the conflict. So I think one of the benefits I or other consultants can do is be able to look with leaders and say, you know what, you think you are alone, but you're not. I work with best places to work, top places to work, companies that are enviable to work for. And I'm working kind of, behind the scenes. And I can say, you are not alone. I have seen this. I have seen this across industries. I have seen this across different types. And I think that can make leaders feel a little bit better. And because there are different lenses to look at and different experiences, I could say, well, this is the way that one leader handled it, or I saw one manager handle it this way, or I saw an employee who had a really good skill and asked this question. So I'm a little bit of a sponge. I pull in information and language and I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I listen to a lot of podcasts because I'm constantly looking for a way to recognize and frame things up, and being able to share that with leaders that go across different, different organizations and types. So I'll go back to, there's always universal stuff happening, but I can be able to ask those reality testing questions. I can ask the what if, have you thought about this question? And I may have influence, but I don't have any power. So they can tell me, Carol, go pound sand. Said it, I just was with an executive director, and I said, hey, I think this might be a lingering issue. I think that this one thing happened, and if leaders want to steal this language that was symbolically significant to this work group, that it wasn't just about the thing, it was about everything that that thing symbolized. And that leader said to me, like, Carol, I've talked about it. I talked about it once. I talked about it twice. It's a dead issue. We have moved on. And I'm like, okay, I'm just bringing it up and letting you know you can do with it what you want to be able to do with it. So being able to highlight those blind spots. So I know we're talking to leaders. So I mean, do you have someone in the organization who could say, I think this is a blind spot, or I think that you are looking at it from a particular lens that is divergent from the other lenses that people are looking at it from, and therefore you're having conflict.
Mhm. So, being that you're a professional and some people might not even know, like, are there some tips, or is there like a simple framework to prepare, like, for something like a difficult conversation? What would you offer there?
So a couple of different things. First, why is it difficult? I find it interesting. I have this one framework that I think about. Is it difficult because you're nervous about it? Or is it difficult because it's a really kind of sensitive topic? The example that I can think about, and when I work with HR professionals, they'll say some of the most uncomfortable conversations are when a coworker says, you know what, I don't think that the person that I'm next to has very good hygiene and they stink. I mean, talk about an uncomfortable, conversation about that and there could be, and I'll stop, my former employment lawyer brain is going, well, there could be a lot of different reasons. There could be something physical going on, that they have, a medical condition or something like that, where it's like, that's just it. Or it could be like, hey, there's kind of certain, there's certain, like, there's a certain social contract here. One is like, the one interesting is, as a divergent note, I have seen more conflict over picking up the break room and not doing dishes than anything. And it's like, so if that's going on with you, just know it is universal, but people view it as lack of accountability, lack of
Wow.
respect, and like, well, they're just expecting me to pick up after them. So there's that, but then there's also conversations, meaning that it's like, you know what, I'm going to have to expend some political capital here. And I'm going to have to deliver news that maybe people don't really want to know. So it's risky in a different type of way. So I would say, what is it? Is it like a sensitive topic about maybe someone's performance, or that maybe you're expecting them to do something different? Or is it one where you're feeling as though you're risking your political capital? And I think it's the political capital and feeling as though someone is going to react in an escalated way that's going to make that conversation difficult.
Hmm. Okay, so to kind of piggyback on that, how would you tell somebody how to set and manage expectations for a conversation? Because a lot of times I think sometimes we just fear it because we don't know how to go in it or how to start it.
Yeah. So here's a great thing. And you set me up beautifully. So I want to highlight this. Uh, um, and I want to give people a little bit of a framework to think about. The first is, in every type of tension or conflict or frustration or disappointment, this is one of the Bowser's rules of the universe. There is an element of unmet expectations. And when I was mediating on a contract basis for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a question I always asked the employee who had filed a charge with the federal government agency responsible for maintaining, anti-harassment, anti-discrimination laws was, um, tell me, how is it that the employer or the boss or HR or your supervisor or your coworker, help me understand, did they meet your expectations? What was your expectation of how the situation was going to be handled? What was your expectation of how they would react when you brought forward this concern? So it's a very open thing of like, tell me about your expectations in this situation. And so if you're preparing for a conversation, think about how is it your expectations may not have been met. And also maybe think about, given the situation, what expectations did the other people possibly have? So think in terms of unmet expectations, and then you can take it one layer deeper and think about what assumptions were you having about the person, about the role, about the process, about the system, about how decent people behave, what is inbounds, what's out of bounds, and just think about what assumptions were the foundation for you having those particular expectations. And one of the things I find a lot in the workplace is that there are a lot of competing assumptions, and there are a lot of systems and processes and directions and interpretations that are competing with one another. In fact, they may be completely contradictory. So being able to think in terms of, okay, what are my expectations? What were their expectations? What assumptions were they working on? What assumptions was I working on? Is it possible there is a system or a process um, issue here? So that way we're getting out of the blaming and shaming game and looking about it. Like, we can talk about expectations. Expectations don't feel blamey and shamey, but just saying like, hey, I had a couple of expectations for how this was going to go down. Can you help me understand, before I kind of tell you what my expectations were, help me kind of understand what your expectations were, how you thought things were going to go down, or how you thought they should have gone down in this particular situation. Then all of a sudden you're listening for, okay, what did we have the same underlying assumptions? What were their assumptions? And then maybe we can talk about, oh, we have a difference of opinion. We have a different idea of how things were supposed to be operationalized. Then all of a sudden we're talking about expectations and assumptions without blame and shame and how things are operationalized. That can feel much more dispassionate. And I think that is a good thing.
There were a lot of good tidbits in what you just said.
Oh, I try.
I was taking notes. I mean, it does make a big difference. Like, it makes a lot of sense what you just said.
Mhm.
And getting out of that blaming and shaming game. Like, that that was a very good point. Thank you for that. Appreciate
Sure.
it. Wow, that's a lot. I could see how you're good at what you do, for
Well,
sure.
I think it's just, it's a framework. And
Uh,
if you can think, how can I have a framework? And I want to be very, very clear here. Um, I have a bit of an irritation point when people will give advice as to what to do, but no tips on how to do it. So I'm trying to give a framework of not just what to do, but how, but like, how you might be able to do it. And notice I gave language. So I'd love for people to be able to like hit the rewind button, take notes and say, okay, this is the language Carol used. That really wouldn't work for me. How could I redo it with still working in this framework of expectations, assumptions, looking systems process, those types of things. I think that's, particularly helpful. And it's a framework I use. Is
yeah.
it the only framework I use? No, but at least it's a consistent framework. And the more you do it, the more people say, oh, poop on a cracker. Here comes Carol again. oh my God, she's going to start this talking about what expectations are. She's going to talk about assumptions. Oh God, here we go again. But then if you like, so yes, that can happen. And you can start having them talk about this was what my expectation was. This is what my assumption was. And notice we're not debating whether the expectation was realistic or not.
Mhm.
But we're just saying this is what the expectation was, this is what the assumption was. And then we could say, oh, I was working off of different assumption, or that assumption might have held true in this circumstance, but I'm seeing it differently as a leader. And here's leaders, you see things differently from a
Mhm.
very, very different lens. You're looking at it organizationally, people are looking at it personally.
Yes.
And also, here's a spoiler. If you've got a lawyer in a room and a CFO in a room and the head of, maintenance and then purchasing, and then you've got someone who is directly customer facing, every single one of those people have a different framework for identifying and also addressing issues. So part of you're sitting there in the middle of very, very divergent ways of um, analyzing, let alone you may have people who are neurodivergent, who have, widely different skill sets. Lucky you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Really great tidbits. Thank you. Before I forget, Carol, how do people get in contact with you?
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking. So, like most folks, I have a website, managingconflict.com. I'm on most social media. And in fact, not too terribly long ago, someone said I was one of the top 30 people to follow on LinkedIn for conflict resolution. I also have a YouTube channel out there where I do little videos, tips, tricks, techniques, language to use, things to think about. And if you want to follow me on or follow the company Conflict Management Strategies on Facebook or on Instagram, you are welcome to do that. And, if you want to be able to drop me a line, just go to managingconflict.com and click on the link, send me an email, and we can maybe get in touch.
Yeah. And I would recommend that I know a lot of people that struggle with this, and those were just fantastic tips, even just how to change the way you think and how the language that you're using. So I've got one last question that pretty much everybody gets, Carol, and which is, because our podcast is called Your Best Day Yet. How would you describe your best day yet?
So I was thinking about this because I did my research and I knew you're going to ask that question. And you know what? It was really, really hard. It was really hard to think about it because my thought is, well, I could say I want to do this and I want it on the beach with a latte. And I'm like, oh, that just sounds so pumped. In my mind, it's like, that would be great, but it would be difficult. And I want to be able to think about, how do I find the elements of doing what I like to do, what challenges me, and sometimes what overwhelms me on a daily basis. And I was reflecting back in the not too recent past where I opened up my calendar for one day and I had a coaching session, and I had I think like a mediated session, and I was also doing a virtual training on that same day. And I think it was the same night that my kid had Cub Scouts. And then I was also like something like, I think I had worked out in the morning, and I thought, after it was all over with, I'm like, I got everything that I ever wanted to do. I was coaching and training and facilitating and doing things outside of work, and taking a little bit of time for myself. And you know what? At the end of the day, I was exhausted. I'm like, great, I got everything that I wanted to, but here's a little tidbit. Isn't it interesting when we get our success and we get our ideal day, sometimes we don't want it all at once. We want to be able not just to control what we get, but the timing. And I thought to myself, well, good luck with that, sister. So I think that that's a little bit of that. I get to do something that challenges me, that makes me go, that sometimes makes me want to take a step back and retreat. And I'm like, "Ugh, no, I need to be able to do it." And being able to talk with people and share the gospel of managing conflict, empowering people, that's always a good thing.
Fabulous answer. Appreciate you being on. Love the advice that you gave us. Hopefully, if you're interested, definitely reach out. Yeah, there's definitely ways to get involved. We all deal with this. I mean, I've been working with companies and even conflict in homes. I mean, this is some of those things are just different expectations at home as well. So you could use it all around. So thanks, Carol. Really appreciate it. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for watching and listening as well. Give us a like and subscribe. You could visit us at centerforvictory.com. And just remember, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, make this your best day yet. We'll see you soon.